is a great privilege to be standing here with one of the few survivors of Labour's original cabinet, who hasn't resigned on principle or been sacked in disgrace. How many jobs have been lost in Aberdeen since Labour came to power? Turning down £25 billion in tax revenue from the North Sea to please their out-of-control Energy Secretary.
Stay with me, because the full video I'm about to show you puts everything into a new perspective. You know, there's a particular kind of chaos that only British politics can produce. Not that dramatic, cinematic kind where someone storms out and slams a door. No. This is the specifically British variety, where everybody is being perfectly civil on the surface, using phrases like the Honourable Lady and Mr. Speaker, while absolutely tearing each other to pieces underneath. It's like watching a very aggressive game of chess, where both players are smiling at each other and one of them is clearly on fire. Welcome back, everybody. Parliament is in session, and today it delivered. Real quick before we roll the footage, if you're enjoying this content, do me a huge favour. Hit that like button and smash subscribe. Over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing. Don't be one of them. It's free for you, and it helps us out more than you know. Already clicked? You're awesome. Let's get into the video.
We come to the Shadow Secretary of State, Claire Coutinho, acting for the official opposition.
Now, Mr. Speaker, it is a great privilege to be standing here with one of the few survivors of Labour's original cabinet, who hasn't resigned on principle or been sacked in disgrace. I feel honoured. So can he tell the House how many jobs have been lost in Aberdeen since Labour came to power?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I remember when the Energy Secretary championed net zero. She said in 2023, we cannot prosper, nor can our children flourish if we don't decarbonise energy.
Mr. Speaker, let me help him out. 1,000 people are losing their jobs every month in places like Aberdeen South because of Labour's policies. They say those oil and gas workers can get new green jobs, but what they don't say is those salaries pay half as much. So can he tell the House how he would feel if the government forced him to take a 50% pay cut?
Deputy Prime Minister.
The Honourable Lady used to be an investment banker, and she's got her facts wrong.
Mr. Speaker, I asked him about pay cuts, and they should care, because if the Mayor of Manchester gets his way, I'm pretty sure half the front bench are going to be getting a pay cut pretty soon. If everything's so hunky-dory, why did half his defence team quit last week? Mr. Speaker, they won't find the money to keep our country safe, so let's go through some of the things they can find the money for. Millions of pounds to build solar farms in the Congo, tens of millions of pounds on an experiment to dim the sun, and they are turning down £25 billion in tax revenue from the North Sea to please their out-of-control Energy Secretary. Does he really think that any of that is more important than defending our country?
Deputy Prime Minister.
We've said that more spending on defence is our #1 priority in this spending review and the next spending review.
Let's set the scene. Prime Minister's questions. The chamber is packed, the benches are rowdy, and Claire Coutinho steps up for the official opposition. Now, she opens with what can only be described as a surgical compliment, noting that she is standing alongside one of the few surviving members of Labour's original cabinet who hasn't, and these are the important words, resigned on principle or been sacked in disgrace. She said she felt honoured. The chamber naturally erupted, and honestly, fair enough, because that observation, delivered with a completely straight face in the middle of PMQs, was the kind of line that makes you rewind the clip 3 times just to make sure you heard it correctly. As opening salvos go, it landed cleanly. But she wasn't there just for the one-liners. She had a very specific question, and it was one the government was not going to enjoy answering. How many jobs have been lost in Aberdeen since Labour came to power? Simple question, direct, the kind that requires either a number or a very good reason why you don't have one. What followed instead was a response that somehow managed to mention the Energy Secretary's 2023 comments about net zero, which is impressive in the sense that it answered absolutely nothing about Aberdeen whatsoever. When a government responds to a question about job losses with a quote from 3 years ago, you start to get a very clear picture of how the conversation's going to go. So, Coutinho did what any reasonable opposition MP does in that situation. She answered it herself. 1,000 jobs a month, she said. 1,000 people every single month in places like Abergele and South losing their livelihoods because of this government's energy policies. And then she went one step further and identified the argument the government always reaches for in these moments, the promise of green jobs, new opportunities, a transition to a cleaner economy. All of which sounds perfectly reasonable until you asked a follow-up question, which Coutinho asked on behalf of every one of those workers. Yes, but what do those green jobs actually pay? Because according to the figures she put forward, those replacement salaries come in at roughly half what the oil and gas industry was paying. Half. So the government's offer to workers in Aberdeen is essentially, well done on your career transition, here's 50% of your previous income, and please stop asking difficult questions at PMQs. She put it simply and effectively. How would you feel, she asked the Chamber, if the government forced you to take a 50% pay cut? It's the kind of question that personalises a policy debate in a way that statistics alone never quite manage. Because it's one thing to talk about energy transitions and decarbonisation targets in the abstract. It's another thing entirely to ask a room full of MPs to imagine their own salary being cut in half and consider whether that still feels like a reasonable trade-off. The silence that follows a question like that is very loud indeed. The response from the government benches pointed out that Coutinho used to be an investment banker, which is, in fairness, true. It is also, in equal fairness, not an answer to the question about pay cuts. It's the parliamentary equivalent of responding to a speeding ticket by pointing out that the officer once got a parking fine. Technically relevant information, completely useless in context. And then Coutinho picked up the pace because she clearly wasn't finished. She noted that if the Mayor of Manchester gets his way, there's a reasonable chance half the front bench might find themselves experiencing that pay cut rather more personally than they'd like. She asked why half the defence team quit last week. She reeled off a list of spending decisions that the opposition finds rather difficult to square with the government's stated priorities. Millions to solar farms abroad. Tens of millions on an experiment to, and I want to make sure I get this right, dim the sun. And a decision to turn down £25 billion in tax revenue from the North Sea. 25 billion, with a B, in tax revenue, left on the table. And the question she put to the Chamber was whether any of those expenditures genuinely rank above defending the country as a priority. The government's position, as articulated in response, is that defence spending is the #1 priority in the current spending review, which is a statement that would carry considerably more weight if it weren't being delivered in the same breath as questions about why the defence team appears to have had something of a difficult week. Words and actions, as any government eventually discovers, have a tendency to be compared against each other. What makes this exchange worth watching and worth talking about is that it captures something genuinely important about where British politics sits right now. The energy transition is real. The economic consequences of that transition are also real. And the gap between the government's messaging and the lived experience of workers in industries being phased out is a gap that is only going to get wider as the policy takes effect. Coutinho didn't invent the job losses in Aberdeen. She didn't manufacture the pay disparity between fossil fuel and green energy roles. She put existing data in front of a chamber that would have rather have talked about almost anything else, and she made them sit with it. That is what opposition is supposed to look like, and that is what this government is going to have to get considerably better at answering. Drop a comment below. Do you think those green job promises actually hold up? Because the workers in Aberdeen deserve a straight answer.